My name is Mitch Speed, and I'm a writer. But more than a writer, I consider myself a storyteller. Throughout the years of my life, I've been blessed to meet some absolutely incredible people. Common people like me, but uncommon people in the sense that they all had a story to tell and a lesson to teach. The following story is one I wrote about an encounter that I had with one of these people. Now, portions of this story are exactly as things occurred, while other portions of this story are my own personal interpretation of how things occurred. I tend to look at life a bit deeper than most, and that is often where the story begins. I met a man, a homeless man. His hair was long and wild, and he had a beard to match. As I briefly spoke with him, he rambled on about things that made no sense, and he was overwhelmed with paranoia. But the longer we spoke, and I looked into his eyes, I could see there was more. More than a crazy man. I could see someone lost deep inside. I could sense he was very intuitive, and I told him so. He looked at me as if he knew. He looked at me as if he knew I could see inside his eyes. Past the point where others feared to venture. He knew, and I knew he knew. I stepped away and took a longer look at this man. I looked at remnants of his life no more than 2 years prior to today. And in those remnants I saw a different man than the one who stood before me. Not a crazy man, not a homeless man. I saw a man much like myself. Though I didn't want to admit it, it scared me. This man that others looked upon as a crazy man was a man like me. A man like me, and a man like you. I saw this man before he became the man I was now looking at. I saw a man with a wife and a child, no long and wild hair, no crazy stories reeking of paranoia. He was a clean-cut man, the man before this man. I made my way back to him and asked him if we could talk. He looked at me, and I looked at him. We looked beyond the two men who were standing before one another. I told him I did not want to overstep my boundaries, but we both knew it was too late for that. He made room for me, and we sat down together. I asked him how he got here. He looked at me and acted as if he didn't know what I was talking about, but as I said before, we both knew. I asked him how he became homeless. I asked him how a man got from there to here. I never told him I had already looked at past remnants of his life, and for that I felt bad. But I had to know, how does a man get from there to here? How does a man like me, or you, step off of the edge and into another world? The conversation started slowly, but as I said before, he knew that I knew. We spoke of life and the different paths we follow. In a way, we were testing one another to see if the trust was there. He needed to see if this was a game or if I really cared. We went back and forth and we gauged the deepness in one another's eyes. At one point he began to cry, but he shut the emotion down before it could overwhelm him. Before he knew if that trust was there, the trust that would allow us to be completely transparent with one another. The conversation proceeded. He shared, and then I shared. I think it was at the point where I shared that he began to let his guard down. He told me how only a few short years ago he was a man on a mission to lead people, a man with a gift of intuitiveness, a man with a wife and a child, a man much like me. He told me of his walk of faith and those who had encouraged him to pursue a life leading people to God. He told me of his different ventures and the winding path he had taken. I listened, but this wasn't what I was looking for. This was not the real answer of how a man could get from there to here. We came to a point where he finally let his guard down. The point where he decided he could trust me. The point where he was willing to open up entirely and break bread with me. He paused briefly and pulled his fingers through his hair. In his eyes I could see the years unfolding. He said, I was 5 years old at the time. Every day my father would pick me up from school. One day I waited for my father to pick me up, but he never came. Alone, I silently made my way home from school. When I went to open the front door of our house, it was locked. I looked in the window and saw that the house was dark and hollow. I sat in disbelief as he told me this story and tried to imagine being a 5-year-old left alone. I could not wrap my head around the thought. He told me how he moved in with other family members until he was finally reunited with his father. No explanations were provided, and life went on as if nothing had ever happened. Then at 17 years old, he came home, and once again, the locks had been changed, and the house was empty. This man picked himself up and became a survivor. It was at that time in his life he had become involved with the clergy, as well as a few other ventures in life. He had survived what would have devastated most people. He met a woman, got married, and together they had a child. Life appeared to be coming together. Then 2 years ago he received a phone call. It was his father. His father said, "Son, I am ill. I need you to take care of me." That small boy who had been abandoned as a child was finally needed. He was living out of state at the time, but he set everything aside, including his wife and son, and flew back home to help his father. He tended to his father as his wife grew away from him. She couldn't understand how he could walk away from everything to run back to someone who had abandoned him so many years ago. Desperate and confused, he continued to tend to his father. And then at 37 years old, he came home, and the locks had been changed. The house was not empty this time, but his father told him he would have to leave and he was no longer welcome. So he left. He walked away from life as we know it and removed himself from everything and everyone. He chose to live his life on the streets. He chose to let go. He told me about his life on the streets and how he has seen people from his life before this life. On a few occasions he has approached these people from his previous life. He told me how they were afraid when they saw him, how they looked at him as if they did not know who he was. He told me he had forgotten how he now looks, how his appearance is nothing like the man before this man. So he no longer approaches people. He's learned to sit back and watch. He has learned to study people and their habits. He is no longer a part of that world he used to live in, the world before he became this man. I asked him if he still thought about his father and if he would ever be able to forgive him. He looked at me and he said, "I've forgiven my father a long time ago. You see, when I thought I was alone, that is when I realized our Father in heaven has always been by my side. When I was going through some of the toughest times, the times that I actually contemplated suicide, our Father spoke to me. You see, God has placed me on this path that I am walking. He placed me on this path so that I could identify with the people that society has cast aside. If not for the fact that I have walked in their shoes and lived the life they are living, I never would have been able to share His word with them. You see, this is my true purpose in life, and the street is my pulpit. This path I am walking has served to open my eyes to things I never would have seen, things I never would have been able to understand." He looked at me and said, "You, my friend, are also walking the path that God has placed you on. Your path is directed by our Father. Our paths have crossed today for a reason far beyond our understanding. We must never lose sight of the people God places in our lives, the people God places in our paths. Nothing is by chance, my brother, and all rivers run to the sea." Our conversation faded, and we sat in silence. It was a comfortable silence because now we both knew. There was nothing to hide, just two men from two different worlds within one big world. Two men, two paths, one purpose. I went for food and brought it back to him. It wasn't much, but it was something to fill his stomach. We shook hands. I wished him the best of God's grace, and we parted ways. We parted ways as brothers, and I was thankful for the time I was allowed to spend with him. thankful for opening my eyes to the world around me and the path I was walking, thankful for the opportunity to become a wiser man. As I walked away, I thought of the possibilities. Did the people he'd approached, the people that were afraid, really not recognize this man? Or was there something deeper than that? Was their fear a fear of, that could be me? And I thought of his father and what could have driven him to do what he had done. What story did he have to tell? What burden did he bear? As I slowly digested everything I had just heard, I silently took stock of my own life and the path I was walking. I thought of my actions and how many people I have passed on the streets, how many people we have all passed on the streets. And I was reminded of these words. Then he will say to those on his left, "Depart from me, ye who are cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me nothing to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, and you did not invite me in. I needed clothes, and you did not clothe me. I was sick and in prison, and you did not look after me." And they answered, "Lord, when did we see you hungry, or thirsty, or a stranger, or needing clothes, or sick, or in prison, and did not help you?" And he will reply, "Truly I tell you, whatever you did not do for one of the least of these, you did not do for me." This is Mitch Speed. Be blessed.